Imagine finding the love of your life, only to realize that the fairy tale has slowly turned into isolation and heartache. Clara thought her marriage would be a lifelong partnership, but as her husband became consumed by work, she found herself alone, struggling through a complicated pregnancy and emotional neglect. What happens when the person you're supposed to rely on the most becomes a distant stranger? In this story, Clara makes a life-changing decision that will redefine her future. Stay with me to hear how she found the courage to reclaim her life and rediscover her strength. Hi, my name is Clara Williams, and I'm 32 years old. I was born and raised in a small, close-knit town in Georgia, where everyone knew each other and family was the foundation of life. Growing up in a place like this gave me a sense of belonging that I never questioned. My childhood was simple, but in its simplicity, there was an abundance of love. My parents owned a small grocery store in town, and while we were never wealthy, we always had enough. More importantly, we had each other. Our days were spent at the store, where my parents worked tirelessly to keep the business running. I helped out whenever I could, stocking shelves, ringing up customers, and learning the importance of hard work from a young age. The store was more than a business. It was a place where our neighbors gathered, where people came not just to shop but to talk, to share stories, and to feel connected. I saw my parents interact with the community with kindness and generosity, and I always admired how they treated everyone who walked through the door like family. My childhood friends, Sarah and Lucy, were practically sisters to me. We spent our summers playing in the fields behind my house, riding our bikes through town, and dreaming about our futures. In a town as small as ours, you couldn't help but think about what life might be like beyond its borders. But as much as I dreamed of adventure, I also felt content where I was. Georgia was my home, and I couldn't imagine leaving it behind. When high school ended, many of my friends left for college, eager to explore new places and new experiences. But I stayed. I wasn't ready to leave my family or the life I had always known. I felt comfortable staying in Georgia, helping my parents with the store, and living in the place where I felt safe and secure. While part of me wondered what it would be like to live in a big city or go off to college, the other part of me was content with the life I had. That was until I met Jack Turner. I remember the day we met like it was yesterday. It was at the town's annual summer festival, a tradition that brought people together from all over the county. I was walking through the vendor booths, enjoying the festive atmosphere, when I saw him. Jack stood out from the crowd, not just because he was tall and handsome, but because he had an air of confidence about him that was different from the men I was used to in our small town. He was visiting Georgia for work, and something about him instantly caught my attention. Jack approached me with a smile that lit up his entire face. He introduced himself, and before I knew it, we were talking like we had known each other for years. He told me about his life, his job in tech, and how he traveled frequently for work. I was fascinated by his stories and the life he led, so different from mine. There was an excitement in Jack's voice when he talked about his plans for the future, and I couldn't help but be drawn to him. Over the next few weeks, Jack made a point of coming back to town. Every time he visited, we spent more and more time together. It wasn't long before we were inseparable. Jack was unlike anyone I had ever met. He was thoughtful, always surprising me with small gifts or flowers, and he had a way of making me feel special. He listened to me in a way that no one else ever had, and I found myself falling for him quickly. We officially started dating, and for the next 6 years, Jack and I built a life together. He eventually moved to Georgia to be closer to me, and while his job still required him to travel, he made every effort to be present when he was home. One of the things I loved most about Jack was how he celebrated every milestone in our relationship. Whether it was the anniversary of our first date or just a random Tuesday, he always found a way to make me feel cherished. For a long time, I thought Jack was the man I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. But as the years went by, the pressure from our family and friends to get married grew. After 6 years together, everyone around us seemed to think it was time to take the next step. Friends would ask when the wedding was going to happen, and even people from our church started to make comments. The pressure was constant, and while I loved Jack deeply, I had doubts. There was a part of me that wasn't sure if marriage was the right decision for us, but I couldn't escape the feeling that it was what everyone expected. Eventually, I gave in to the pressure. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony, just close family and friends in a simple chapel. I wore a lace dress my mother had passed down to me, and Jack looked handsome in a suit. But even as I stood at the altar, holding his hands, a part of me felt uncertain. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Still, I pushed those doubts aside, telling myself that this was what I was supposed to do, that it was the natural next step in our relationship. Not long after Jack and I got married, everything began to change. Our life together had barely settled into a routine when Jack received an exciting job offer. He had been working in tech for several years, and although we were living a comfortable life in Georgia, this new opportunity was one he couldn't resist. A tech startup in San Francisco had reached out to him, offering him a lead position with the chance to grow with the company. It was a dream job, one that would allow him to make a name for himself in an industry he was passionate about. Jack was thrilled. I'll never forget the way his face lit up when he told me the news. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he talked about all the possibilities this new job would bring. He kept saying how this was the break he had been waiting for and that it would change our lives. Jack's enthusiasm was contagious, but I couldn't ignore the growing pit in my stomach. While he was busy imagining our new life in San Francisco, I couldn't help but think about everything we would be leaving behind. Georgia was my home. I had spent my entire life there, surrounded by family and friends. The thought of leaving the familiarity of my small town for a big city across the country filled me with anxiety. I would be leaving my parents, who I had always been so close to, and my friends, who had become like sisters to me. The idea of starting over in a place as vast and unknown as San Francisco seemed terrifying. But Jack was persuasive, and I knew how important this job was to him. He promised me that everything would be fine, that we would build a new life together and create new memories in California. He painted a picture of a future full of adventure, success, and excitement, and part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to share in his enthusiasm, to see the move as a new chapter in our lives, but deep down, I was scared. Despite my reservations, I agreed to move with him. I told myself that this was what couples did. They made sacrifices for each other. They supported each other's dreams. Jack had always been there, and now it was my turn to be there for him. We packed up our lives in Georgia, said tearful goodbyes to our family and friends, and made the cross-country journey to San Francisco. At first, everything seemed like an adventure. The city was vibrant and alive in a way that Georgia never was. The streets were always bustling with people, and there was an energy in the air that made me feel like anything was possible. Jack and I spent our first few weekends exploring our new surroundings. We visited the Golden Gate Bridge, took long walks through the colorful streets of Haight-Ashbury, and dined at trendy restaurants that served foods I had never even heard of. For a while, it felt like we were on vacation, and I tried to embrace the excitement of our new life. But as the weeks turned into months, the novelty of the city began to wear off. Spending long hours at the office and often traveling for work, his career was taking off, just as he had hoped, but it left me feeling more and more alone. I found myself spending my days alone in our apartment, surrounded by the noise of the city, but feeling completely isolated. I tried to keep myself busy. I started searching for a job, hoping that it would help me feel more grounded in this new place. But finding work in a city as competitive as San Francisco wasn't easy, and I spent weeks sending out resumes and going to interviews without any success. Without a job, and with Jack spending most of his time at work, I began to feel increasingly lost. The excitement I had felt when we first arrived had been replaced by a deep sense of homesickness. I missed Georgia. I missed the quiet, familiar streets of my hometown, and most of all, I missed my family. I called my parents often, trying to fill the void that Jack's absence had created. They were supportive, as they always had been, but I could tell they were worried about me. They could hear the loneliness in my voice, even though I tried to hide it. I didn't want to admit how much I was struggling. I didn't want Jack to feel guilty for pursuing his dreams, and I didn't want my family to feel like I had made a mistake by leaving Georgia. So I kept my feelings to myself, pretending that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Jack, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. He loved his new job, and I could see how passionate he was about the work he was doing. Every evening when he came home, he would talk excitedly about his day, about the new projects he was working on, and the people he was meeting. I tried to be happy for him, but it was hard not to feel resentful. While his career was flourishing, I felt like my life was slipping through my fingers. The man I had fallen in love with, who had always made me feel so important, seemed to be drifting further and further away. As time went on, Jack's work became the center of our lives. He spent more and more time at the office, and when he wasn't working, he was exhausted. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams for the future, became short and businesslike. We were like two ships passing in the night, living in the same apartment, but barely sharing our lives. I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, but he didn't seem to understand. He would tell me that things would get better, that once he was more settled in his job, we would have more time together. But I wasn't sure how long I could wait. A few months after we had settled into our new life in San Francisco, something unexpected happened. I found out I was pregnant. At 33 years old, the news hit me like a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me was excited. I had always wanted to be a mother, and I imagined that maybe this would bring Jack and me closer again. We had been drifting apart since the move, and I hoped that starting a family would ground us, giving us a reason to reconnect. I still remember the moment I told Jack. He was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, probably working on something for his new job. I had been feeling a bit off for days. Nausea, fatigue, the usual signs that something was changing. When I took the test, it confirmed what I had already suspected. I was pregnant. I walked into the kitchen with the test in hand, my heart racing, unsure how Jack would react. When I told him, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. For a brief moment, I felt like things were going to be okay. But the reality of pregnancy wasn't as simple as I had imagined. Almost immediately, I started experiencing complications. The doctors put me on bed rest, instructing me to take it easy and avoid stress. It was a difficult adjustment. Suddenly, I was confined to our apartment, unable to even go for a walk in the city. I was still trying to get used to. Jack's enthusiasm about the pregnancy quickly turned into distraction as his workload increased. He had new responsibilities at the company, and although he would check in on me, his mind was always elsewhere. Days turned into weeks, and I felt the weight of isolation grow heavier. Being on bed rest meant I couldn't do much to occupy my time. I spent hours staring out the window, watching people go about their lives, while mine seemed to stand still. Jack, meanwhile, was busier than ever. He would come home late, often too tired to talk or spend time with me. I knew he was doing what he thought was best, working hard to provide for our future, but I couldn't help feeling abandoned. Without family or close friends in the city, I had no one to rely on. My parents called often, worried about me, but they were thousands of miles away. The loneliness I had felt after moving to San Francisco was nothing compared to the isolation I felt now. I wanted to share the excitement of pregnancy with Jack, but he was always too preoccupied. When I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, about my fears, my worries, my struggles, he would brush them off, telling me everything would be fine once the baby arrived. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true. I could feel the distance between us growing, and I didn't know how to bridge it. I tried my best to be understanding. I knew Jack was under a lot of pressure at work, and I didn't want to add to his stress. So I kept my feelings to myself, hoping that things would get better after the baby was born. As the pregnancy progressed, my health continued to be a concern. I was constantly tired, physically and emotionally drained. There were days when I would cry alone in the apartment, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. I didn't feel like myself anymore. My body was changing, my life was changing, and I felt like I was losing control. And through it all, Jack remained distant. One evening, Jack came home from work and looked at me with a frustrated expression. He sighed and said, "You're not taking care of yourself anymore, Clara. You look tired all the time. You're not even trying." His words stung. I was doing everything I could to stay healthy, to protect our unborn child, and to keep the household running while being confined to bed rest. But in that moment, it felt like none of that mattered. His criticism made me feel like I was failing as a wife and as a mother before our child had even been born. I tried to explain to him how hard it had been for me, how isolated I felt, but Jack didn't seem to understand. He was consumed by his work, by his own stress, and there was no room for my struggles. The more I tried to connect with him, the more distant he became. The nights grew longer. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was the life I had signed up for. Jack would come home late, exhausted from work, and go straight to bed without saying a word. Sometimes he would come home and immediately open his laptop, working until the early hours of the morning. It was as if we were living separate lives, coexisting in the same space, but not really sharing anything. I began to wonder if Jack even noticed how unhappy I was. He had always been so attentive, so caring, but now it felt like I was invisible. My body was going through all the changes that come with pregnancy, my belly growing, my energy waning, but Jack hardly acknowledged it. When he did, It was only to comment on how tired I looked or how I wasn't myself anymore. As the due date approached, I became increasingly anxious. What would happen once the baby arrived? Would Jack finally be present, or would he continue to drift further away? I tried to tell myself that everything would change once we held our child in our arms, but deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true. The day finally came when our son, Noah, was born. After months of anticipation, bed rest, and emotional turmoil, it felt like all the struggles we had been through were worth it. Jack was there at the hospital, smiling down at Noah, and for a fleeting moment, I thought that maybe, just maybe, things were going to get better. Maybe Noah would be the glue that held us together. But the reality of parenthood quickly set in. The sleepless nights, constant feedings, and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a newborn took their toll. While I was thrilled to be a mother, the exhaustion was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My body was still recovering from childbirth, and the emotional strain of the previous months lingered. I felt like I was barely holding it together. Jack, on the other hand, seemed to distance himself even further. His initial excitement over Noah's birth faded quickly as he resumed his long hours at work. He would leave early in the morning, often before Noah and I were even awake, and come home late at night. By the time he got home, I was usually too exhausted to do anything but sleep. Our conversations became even more infrequent, and when we did talk, it was usually about practical matters: diapers, bills, groceries. The connection we once had felt like it had completely dissolved. One evening, after an especially long day of taking care of Noah by myself, I tried to talk to Jack about how I was feeling. I told him that I was struggling, that I needed more help. I could barely finish my sentence before he cut me off. "You're overreacting, Clara," he said, his tone dismissive. "I'm doing everything I can at work to provide for us. The least you could do is handle things at home." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent the entire day caring for our newborn, juggling feedings, diaper changes, and trying to keep the apartment in some semblance of order, all while feeling utterly alone. And yet here Jack was, accusing me of not doing enough. It was as if he didn't see or appreciate anything I was going through. I tried to stay calm, tried to explain that I needed him to be more present, that Noah needed him, too. But every time I brought it up, he would become defensive, insisting that he was doing his part by working to support us. It was as if there was no room in his mind for my struggles or my emotions. The more I tried to reach him, the more he pulled away. The distance between us became unbearable. Jack started spending more time out of the house, going out with colleagues after work, or taking trips for business that seemed to happen more and more frequently. When he was home, he was either on his laptop, working late into the night, or asleep. We barely saw each other, and when we did, it was like we were strangers living under the same roof. I couldn't help but feel like I had lost the man I had fallen in love with. The Jack who used to surprise me with flowers and celebrate every little moment in our relationship was gone, replaced by someone who barely seemed to care. I felt trapped in a marriage that no longer brought me happiness, trapped in a city where I had no support system, and trapped by the overwhelming responsibility of caring for Noah on my own. One night, as I sat alone in the nursery, rocking Noah to sleep, I realized that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, isolated, unhappy, and ignored by the person who was supposed to be my partner. I had tried everything I could think of to make things better. I had tried talking to Jack, tried creating a peaceful environment for us to reconnect, but nothing had worked. I felt like I was slowly losing myself. In that quiet moment, with Noah sleeping peacefully in my arms, I made a decision. I needed to leave, not just for my own sanity, but for Noah's sake. He deserved a mother who could be fully present for him, and I couldn't be that mother if I stayed in this toxic environment. I didn't know exactly what my next step would be, but I knew I needed help. I needed someone who would understand what I was going through. I picked up my phone and called my sister, Emma. Emma had always been my rock. She was 38 and lived in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 kids. We hadn't seen each other much since I moved to San Francisco, but we talked on the phone often. Emma knew I had been struggling, but I had never fully opened up to her about how bad things had gotten. That night, I told her everything. Emma listened patiently as I poured my heart out. I told her about how distant Jack had, about how I felt like I was raising Noah on my own, and about how lonely I was. I told her that I didn't know how much longer I could do it. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Emma spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Clara, you don't have to do this alone," she said. "Come stay with me. We'll figure it out together." Hearing those words was like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. I didn't have to keep pretending that everything was okay. I didn't have to stay in a situation that was making me miserable. I had a way out. The next few days, I packed my things, gathering only what Noah and I would need for the trip. I didn't tell Jack right away. I knew he would try to convince me to stay, to tell me that things would get better. But I had heard those promises before, and I wasn't going to fall for them again. This time, I was doing what was best for me and my son. The morning I left San Francisco was bittersweet. I had packed my things while Jack was at work, and as I stood in our apartment one last time, holding Noah, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Leaving was hard. I had spent years building a life with Jack, and part of me still clung to the hope that things could get better. But deep down, I knew that I was making the right decision for both myself and Noah. I left a note for Jack on the kitchen table, explaining that I needed space, that I was going to stay with Emma for a while to figure things out. It wasn't goodbye forever, but it was the break I so desperately needed. The drive to the airport was. I had Noah in the car seat next to me, and as I navigated the busy streets of San Francisco, I couldn't help but feel like I was leaving behind not just a city, but an entire chapter of my life. The once vibrant energy of the city that had excited me when we first moved now felt suffocating. I was ready for a fresh start, ready to be somewhere that felt like home again. When I landed in Portland, Emma was waiting for me at the airport. The moment I saw her, I burst into tears. She wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. Emma didn't ask questions or press me for details. She just held me and told me everything was going to be okay. That night, as I settled into her home, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I had made the hardest decision of my life, but now I had the support I needed to move forward. The first few weeks in Portland were a period of adjustment. Emma and her family welcomed Noah and me with open arms, and slowly, I began to regain my footing. Emma's house was warm and full of light, the complete opposite of the cold, empty apartment I had left behind in San Francisco. Being surrounded by family again reminded me of what I had been missing, the comfort of people who truly cared about me. Noah adjusted surprisingly well to the change. Emma's kids doted on him, and seeing him laugh and play with them filled me with a sense of hope. I had worried that the move would be hard on him, but he seemed to thrive in the new environment. Watching him grow and develop in those early weeks gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. I knew that staying with Emma was only a temporary solution, so I started thinking about my next steps. I needed to find a job, to create a new life for Noah and me. Emma helped me look for opportunities, and after a few weeks of searching, I landed a position as an administrative assistant at a small company in downtown Portland. It wasn't my dream job, but it was steady work, and it gave me a sense of independence that I hadn't felt in a long time. Going back to work was both exciting and nerve-wracking. I had been out of the workforce for so long, focused on being a wife, and that I wasn't sure if I still had it in me. But as the days went on, I found that I enjoyed the routine, the sense of purpose that came with having a job again. My coworkers were friendly, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was part of something. The loneliness that had consumed me in San Francisco began to fade, replaced by a sense of empowerment. Meanwhile, Jack continued to call and text, asking me to come home. He promised that things would change, that he would be more present, more involved in Noah's life. But I had heard those promises before, and this time, I wasn't going to let myself fall into the same trap. I needed to take care of myself, to put my own happiness first for a change. As time passed, I began to explore Portland more. It was a city full of culture and creativity, and I found myself drawn to the art scene. On weekends, I would take Noah to local parks or visit art galleries, immersing myself in the city's vibrant energy. Slowly but surely, I was building a life that felt fulfilling, a life that was mine. It was during one of these outings that I met David Carter. He was 36, an art teacher at a local school, and we bumped into each other at an art exhibit. David was kind, patient, and had a quiet, thoughtful demeanor that was refreshing after the emotional chaos of my relationship with Jack. He wasn't flashy or overly confident like Jack had been, but he was genuine. We struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were talking for hours about art, life, and everything in between. David and I started seeing each other more often, but I was cautious. I had just come out of a complicated, emotionally draining marriage, and I wasn't ready to dive into something new. But David never pressured me. He was content to take things slow, and over time, a friendship blossomed into something more. What I appreciated most about David was how he treated Noah. From the very beginning, he made an effort to include him in everything we did. The two of them bonded quickly, and seeing Noah smile and laugh with David warmed my heart in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found someone who truly understood me, not just as a woman, but as a mother. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. At 34, my life looks nothing like I imagined it would when I first moved to San Francisco. But in many ways, it's better than I ever could have dreamed. I've found peace in Portland, a city that feels like home, and I've built a life that is filled with love, joy, and purpose. Noah and I are thriving, and while the journey hasn't been easy, I've learned that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest rewards. Let's now see, from a biblical perspective, what we can learn from this story. When we look at Clara's situation, where she faced challenges in her marriage, the Bible offers a range of guidance and principles that can help reflect on relationships, especially in difficult times. The Bible speaks about the importance of love, patience, and sacrifice in relationships, but it also emphasizes mutual respect, individual dignity, and the pursuit of truth. The purpose of marriage. According to the Bible, marriage is a sacred institution created by God to be a loving union between a man and a woman. In Genesis 2:24 we read, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." This verse highlights God's intention that marriage be an intimate and deep partnership where both spouses become one, united in purpose. However, marriage in the Bible is not without challenges. Everyday life, work pressures, and emotional demands can bring difficulty, as seen in Clara and Jack's story. Jack became so engrossed in his work that he neglected his responsibilities as a husband and father, leading to emotional disconnection between them, something the Bible also addresses. Love and sacrifice in marriage. The Bible provides a clear model of how love should be expressed within marriage. In Ephesians 5:25, husbands are instructed to love their wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. This suggests a sacrificial love, where the husband places the needs of his wife above his own, caring for and protecting. He was so focused on his career that he emotionally distanced himself from Clara, who was dealing with a complicated pregnancy and loneliness. Jack's lack of support left Clara feeling isolated and invisible. While the Bible emphasizes the importance of sacrifice and commitment, it also highlights the need for reciprocity in relationships. A healthy marriage, according to the Bible, should be a place where both spouses feel valued and loved. Communication and mutual respect. One of the biggest issues in Clara and Jack's relationship was the lack of communication. The Bible values communication and mutual respect in any relationship, especially in marriage. Ephesians 4:29 teaches, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." This verse reminds us that words have power. Jack, by criticizing Clara instead of support, failed to use words that built her up, which led to further emotional distancing in their marriage. Communication is essential for maintaining a healthy marriage. In times of crisis, such as during Clara's difficult pregnancy, both spouses must strive to listen to each other and offer support. The Bible suggests not only respect through words, but also actions that demonstrate that respect. Divorce and separation in the Bible. The issue of divorce is always delicate when viewed in light of Scripture. In Matthew 19:6, Jesus teaches that, "So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate." This verse emphasizes the view that marriage is a lifelong commitment, and separation should be avoided whenever possible. However, the Bible also acknowledges that there are situations where separation may be necessary. In Matthew 19:9, Jesus mentions that divorce can be permitted in cases. While Clara's case did not involve infidelity, she was living in a relationship where there was significant emotional neglect. The absence of love, support, and communication from Jack created an environment where Clara felt trapped and devalued. In situations like this, while the Bible encourages reconciliation and the pursuit of marriage restoration, it also recognizes the importance of living in peace. In 1 Corinthians 7:15, Paul writes, "But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or the sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace." The principle here is that, although marriage is sacred, God desires that his children live in peace and dignity, not in continuous suffering. The pursuit of peace and happiness. Clara, in deciding to leave Jack, made a difficult but necessary decision for her emotional health and that of her son, Noah. The Bible teaches that peace should be a goal in our lives. Romans 12:18 says, where she could be the best version of herself for Noah, aligns with this principle of living in peace. Although the ideal situation would have been for Jack to recognize his mistakes and commit to the marriage, Clara made a courageous choice to leave to protect her well-being. The Bible also speaks about the importance of seeking wisdom and divine guidance in times of difficulty. In James 1:5 we read, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given." By leaving her marriage, Clara sought emotional support from her sister and found a way to restart her life. She could have also sought spiritual guidance, trusting that God would lead her on her journey of healing and renewal. Looking at Clara's situation in light of the Bible, we see that marriage is a sacred institution, but one that requires love, communication, and mutual respect to thrive. When these qualities are absent, as in Clara and Jack's case, the relationship can deteriorate. The Bible offers wisdom and encouragement for those facing difficulties in their marriages, but also acknowledges that, in certain circumstances, separation may be a necessary path to restoring peace and personal dignity. Clara's focus on taking care of herself and Noah is ultimately a pursuit of something the Bible deeply values: